of the snail, the Fibonacci sound of the conch. Third eye rainbow swastika in my pine cone like a dirt bike goes. Third eye rainbow swastika in my pine cone like a dirt bike goes. Third eye rainbow swastika in my pine cone like a dirt bike goes. And cream, you make that dough, the symbol show euthanasia. Nightmare hippie girl, blue wrench, flippy Illuminati, get the VIP cause I'm a 33. A bunch of important numbers.
3,
A bunch of important numbers.
42,
A bunch of important numbers.
483,
A bunch of important numbers.
5,
A bunch of important numbers.
0,
A bunch of important numbers.
9,
A bunch of important numbers.
23,
A bunch of important numbers.
7,
A bunch of important numbers.
11,
A bunch of important numbers.
11,
I'm in a cult. 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 I'm in a cult.
Okay, I think we're live now. Today is Sunday, September the 3rd, 2023, and we are here to discuss Burning Man, which has a mud flood, an Ebola outbreak. It appears Gaia has attacked. Either Gaia or what's the other one? Have they found a way to blame the deep state yet? But I've mostly seen fingers pointed at the attendees because they were bringing their carbon footprints. They were maintaining this unsustainable activity, and this is just Mother Nature lashing back at them. But there are apparently 73,000 people locked down right now. I've heard the phrase state of national state of emergency. I've heard this stuff thrown around. I don't know if that's true, but let me go ahead and go through. Revelation 16, Cubstar posted it. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple saying to the seven angels, "Go and pour out the bowls of the wrath of God on the earth." And the first bowl is loathsome sores. And these loathsome sores could be a number of things. It could be Ebola, it could be monkeypox. They might have brought them with them. But it says here, the first went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and a foul and loathsome sword came upon the men who had the mark of the beast, and those who had worshipped his image. Well, prior to this, they were worshiping this, a big phoenix. And you know how often we talk about the symbol of the phoenix and how it correlates with the burning man. I've been saying this for a few years. Well, here they literally burned a phoenix. And before it was a phoenix, it was a box. It was a big monolith. And I've often pointed this out as well, that Black Rock City, Nevada, which is where this takes place, is a reference to the black cube, this black monolith, which is also symbolic of, I think, the cult that runs this place. And the phoenix is representative of the burn it down, build back better. Same symbol that you see in the dove from Noah's Ark. It's a reset symbol. You flood the zone. You start off with your core group, your hand-picked, chosen ones, and then you repopulate. That's ultimately what the myth is about. And here we have it. They're worshiping the phoenix. 73,000 at Burning Man told to shelter, conserve food. Now, 73,000 is a lot of people, and the number stands out for the same reason that the symbol of the phoenix and the monolith does. The 73 seconds is how many seconds the Challenger was going before it blew up. 73 seconds is 1 minute 13 seconds, and you'll often find 113 and 73 used interchangeably. 73 also gets you L, EL, which again ties into the same figure. Saturn or Osiris or the Burning Man all represents this same dying, resurrecting sun god motif. And this here, 7.3.11.3 connection also interestingly connects to the iPhone 10, which we remark on a number of things that fit the same pattern. And it was in 2017 on November the 3rd that the iPhone 10 came out, which is an obvious anagram for I, Phoenix. But as we get into the deeper symbolism here, you'll see how consistent it is. For example, Burning Man started in 1986 and was uninterrupted until 2020 because of the COVID. But in 2019, the 33rd, there was a 33-year-old man found dead at Burning Man. And this was just months after a 33-year-old with a USA shirt set himself on fire at the Ellipse in front of the White House. So I did a little research. Turns out 33 years prior, the same year Burning Man started, a man during the Reagan administration, 33 years old, set himself on fire in front of the White House. These are just scratching the surface, but the Burning Man, Phoenix, Christ, Corona are all overlapping symbols, as you've mostly already seen, but we'll continue to flesh through this. Let's see who has joined us. Yeah, the sound is back on. It just took a moment because I reset the system last night. Yeah, there was a mud flood apparently. Joined by Jennifer Reeves, AJob2677, Peace Circle 360, Middleman AD, Johnny's List, Craig Mack, awesome. Yeah, so if you just got here, this is the last live stream until tomorrow morning, where we're going to have some guests here in the office. So just a quick catch up. There's a news agency, I think it's out of Sweden, and they're doing a documentary on conspiracy theorists. And coincidentally, I was already working on a video project to introduce the idea of auto-hoaxing in a more concise and level-headed way, instead of just saying, these people call everything fake. That's just not the case. And so I was preparing a number of long-form interviews, and I was making this the objective to do at the end of August. And I ordered, to this effect, the Auto-Hoaxology 101 textbook, and I started putting everything together. And then out of the blue, I was contacted by this documentary crew who had a number of questions for me about the infinite plane idea and what we're really asserting. And they want to actually take the time to understand. And so they're actually interviewing not just me, but anyone else who wants to show up here, even remotely. So if you want to be a part of this, I'll give you more details as they're available, but it's not a hit piece insofar as you're not putting yourself out to be a target just by speaking these things, but I do think we have a point. And the most important thing here is taking the channel itself and inserting it onto the world stage so it can no longer be like unexisted. It's not like we ever got canceled because we never existed in the first place. To be canceled, you have to exist. And they wouldn't go so far as to cancel us because they would have to acknowledge our existence. Because what we are positing here undermines their claim to authority on the interpretation of reality as defined by mass media writ large. And they're going to come down here to the office conference room. I'll have Skype open for anyone who wants to speak remotely. But I'm going to be introduced to them in person. They'll let me know where they're coming from, and I'll have more details. But all I can say is the whole thing seems to be about getting a very well-rounded perspective on conspiracy theories, up to including the flat Earth topic. Jennifer Reeve says, remember Woodstock in '99 and all the mud? Yes, that's right. Well, this was at some lake bed, and you'll see there's going to be a lot of what I kind of like to see when the factions eat their own. We're going to see a lot of this, kind of like Laura Loomer going after MTG. Well, here you're going to see leftist environmentalists who are probably mad because they couldn't afford to go, getting kind of a bit of a kick out of seeing all these burners get flooded. You do see a bit of enjoyment, and you will continue to see more of it, because these people, greener is meaner. You're not sustainable. They resent the fact that you breathe. So here's some more rumors. Yo, just figured you should hear from me first. Daryl is crazy sick with something that has him coughing up coagulated blood. The medic showed up wearing a full suit. No idea where he is now. Stay in your camper. Grendel told me they're putting up a fence on the west side. It's an outside agency. Rumors on the ground, there's some sort of virus on the loose at Burning Man that causes boils, vomiting, hemorrhaging. Apparently that's why they're not letting people in. No idea if this is true. I love this. No idea if it's true. I'm just going to spread it, knowing most people will probably believe it. But my first take on this is, if they are going to do some kind of outbreak like that, it's going to be applauded by the right wing and the left wing. It's kind of interesting here, because the right's going to say, well, God's doing it to you. Because if you didn't look, the Drudge Report is calling this Sodom and Gomorrah, because it's just this, apparently, I imagine it to be a very sandy orgy in the desert, uncomfortable. But they're doing it. And it's being called Sodom and Gomorrah, they're being called degenerate, etc. The usual accusations. So one commenter on this said, God will not be mocked. So here they are praising this idol, the burning phoenix thing, and then God floods them. And then the left will say, oh, it's because you burned fossil fuels. And on the way in, because the environmentalists were actually blocking the entrance to Burning Man, imperiling hundreds of people's lives, thousands of people's lives, who knows, just trapping people in their cars. But they were removed aggressively because of a false claim that they were armed. That's kind of the basis for it, and they were kind of strong-armed and ripped out of the way. But this is being looked at as Gaia getting back at them, because they contradict what they know to be, well, they contradict their own values when they get in their RVs and they drive across the country out here into this desert where they want to, act like they can set up a sustainable community on the fly and not leave anything behind. No, it's totally a farce. And then here they are watching the police state rip down this barrier and attack their environmentalist martyrs who are gluing themselves to the streets. It doesn't look good for the greenies. They look like a bunch of hypocrites. And both sides are lambasting them. I don't see any sympathy. Ricky Johnson says they really are starting to eat themselves. Right. Well, if Alex Jones was there, he would be probably noting which ones he wants to take home. He was only 6 weeks into the pandemic when he was talking about eating his neighbor's, quote, ass, if you recall. And he specified that he was going to go after the liberals. He's going to eat leftists because they're the reason why he's at home for 6 weeks, because that was so terrible. I was just kind of struck by the absurdity of this guy who's been selling storable food items for the apocalypse for the last 30 years, suddenly thinking about eating his neighbors. I mean, wouldn't that be the last resort? Or do you want to save your storable food items until the last resort, until you've already, exhausted your neighborhood? Okay, I did a poll today, kind of informal, but I think this is representative of a good swath of the population of Twitter users. Are you scared of nuclear bombs? Yes, I'm brainwashed. Or no, nukes are fake. And 75% of the respondents said nukes are fake. Only 25% admitted to being afraid and brainwashed. I applaud their honesty. We have more Burning Man news to get to here. Let's go ahead and get some more rumor mongering in, and then we'll talk about the fake Snoop image that's going viral. And nobody called it out until I dropped it into the fake news wood chipper, and it took 5 seconds for someone to take it apart.
Most of y'all have probably heard that Burning Man was declared a national emergency, but there's some pretty crazy stuff coming out. So it was announced earlier that Burning Man was declared a national...
Now, I don't know if that's true. In fact, I don't think it is true at all. I don't believe that it was a national emergency. That's just kind of a rumor. And look, if there are people coming out with boils and vomiting and all that stuff, they're probably crisis actors. Like, think about it. All these out-of-work Hollywood actors.
emergency because it was flooded. And so they sent in FEMA, which already seemed kind of like a weird reason to send in FEMA and keep anyone from leaving the festival. 73,000 people they're keeping locked in there for flooding. Now there's some new terrifying information coming out that there's a virus on the loose in the festival and that people are getting really sick with boils, vomiting, hemorrhaging. To me, this makes way more sense than flooding in terms of what their response was to the situation. This is a text from one of the festivals.
Now, this is pretty bad. This is pretty scary. But now, let's listen to someone else who's actually there. Not a TikToker, but someone who's there.
So we're okay. I think that the news is saying that it's pretty bad out here. It is. There's mud. You can't really walk or drive. We have Wi-Fi for a moment, so I'm posting this. This is how Peggy and I look right now. Yep, no shoes because it's really hard to walk with shoes. My boots are like 5 inches, and then the mud became 5 inches, so I was kind of on stilts. But yeah, as part of this update, we are not allowed out of the playa. The gates are locked. We're okay. We have enough tuna for a week.
They're okay. I've seen people dancing out in the mud. They don't care. This is what they came to do. And they're going to be stuck until Tuesday or Wednesday or something because they just can't leave the mud. So who are you going to believe? Someone who's there, who's comfortable, or someone on TikTok who is pointing out how this is some kind of cover-up, there's some outside agency because people are there experiencing some kind of breakout, that this is a Burning Man mass sacrifice, Illuminati style. And here you have Chris Rock escaping Burning Man in the back of a fan's pickup truck after walking 6 miles. I would have asked him, hey, how much did they pay you to get fake slapped by Will Smith? Because you're not going to convince me that was real. That was 100% a psyop, some Babylonian king slapping ritual. I mean, I would just call him out as Illuminati. I mean, what else are you going to do? Pretend like he's just one of you? Just a normal person who got slapped by a Scientologist in what was obviously contextualized as some kind of occult ritual. I mean, we don't forget these things. The slap had many meanings beyond just crossing the line, where now it's okay to use force against comedy, but a lot of comedians were dying at the time. And free speech has just been under attack, and I kind of thought that was a symbolic attack on free speech, but it had other meanings as well. The Chris Rock slapping ritual. Johnny's List says, why can't they leave? I think they need to bring in something to clear up the roads. It has to do with mud. Cubstar says something smells fishy. Yeah, I don't know if you caught that, but basically she said that they're eating tuna for the next few days. I'm sure it's going to smell great there. Okay, let's go listen to this broadcast from Alex Jones from a little while ago. You know, sometimes looking back at it, I'm like, how did I miss the fact that this was all satire the whole time? This is an interesting little rant where he talks about how John Kerry had sex in coffins hundreds of times and also in vats of feces.
They believe they are possessed by entities. Basically, space aliens.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that part. Okay, we're talking about space alien orgies in buckets of feces and coffins. Like, this guy's always been satire. It's always been parody.
When you're I don't believe this. Let's be clear. When you look at John Kerry, though, and his tomb mate, George W. Bush, and the rest of them, these are people that had gay sex hundreds of times in coffins, begging for spiritual entities to possess them. And you know what? Put John Kerry on screen. You know what? Put the video from yesterday.
Now, it gets even worse. And we're talking again about space aliens possessing skull and bonesmen in the coffins. I mean, it just sounds so uncomfortable in every way.
Higher level initiates. John Kerry, ladies and gentlemen, is a member of a satanic death cult.
Now, that part is undeniably true. The rest of it could just be to muddy the waters. But that part is true. And if you look into World War Zero, he has declared war on all carbon super spreaders. He wants to cut your lifespans in half or get you to somehow breathe half as much for the rest of your existing lifespan. These people are pretty dark.
And no wonder he wants to start World War III. I mean, what do you call it psychologically? I mean, if you don't believe in these entities like they do, okay, it doesn't exist. Doesn't matter. They believe entities possess them in pits of feces.
All right, so aliens are into some pretty crazy stuff, because he did say that these were aliens. We'll move on. That was not really all that relevant to today's conversation, other than to point out that when you look back and you kind of retro auto hoax, you can kind of see how things have always been phony, and we really didn't pick up on it until maybe after, well, for me anyway, after 2013, 2014. It took a little while after Sandy Hook to really start to peel away some of these layers, but you didn't have any other sources. You had to go to controlled opposition to get any good info. And then, of course, you would watch them screen the calls. Okay, now this is the reaction from Andrew Tate and his brother. Now, I have another video I have to play, a clip, and it has to do with Epstein and how Epstein is likely a construct, totally made up. And listening to this description of how you could have a person who exists and they're real, but it's mostly an act. Like, is Elon Musk really a billionaire? Well, we know he's not a he's not a potential astronaut. He's faking space. He's a space faker. He's not really some kind of space mogul, because there is no such thing. It's sort of an artificial role, in other words. And I'm looking at someone like Andrew Tate as also being someone in a manufactured role. Like, I think it's largely a construct. But his take on it is pretty interesting. I'll just play a clip.
So first, we're going to talk about a few things, but the first thing I want to do is I want to laugh at absolutely everybody who's at Burning Man. Have you seen this?
Oh yeah, Burning Man, Loser Fest.
Loser Fest.
Yeah, where there's like 6 hot girls who go toe.
Well, their take is pretty bad, actually. It's kind of typical for what they're about. But you'll see, I'm just pointing out that there's no sympathy, left or right. Right is blaming, well, God, and left is blaming climate change. Typical. CNN reports a 26-foot-tall wooden box was set ablaze at the Burning Man. Again, it looked like a monolith, to reveal a secret monument hidden within, a giant steel phoenix. 26 foot tall, 13 feet wide. I haven't delved into the numbers very much, but the phoenix and the monolith thing is interesting, how much that we've already correlated these things with the Black Rock ritual. And this is no less of a satanic ritual than what you see at Bohemian Grove, which is also a Burning Man, although they call it cremation of care. And there's another Burning Man at the Washington Monument every year. They call it Catharsis at the Mall, where they burn an effigy in front of the Washington Monument. This is actually a pretty common thing. In fact, later this month, they do a Burning Man here in Santa Fe, which I'm going to. They call it Old Man Gloom. But I've been there before, and these are somewhat analogous traditions, I think. We says Audio Stream is working on paranormal. Yeah, we made the top 13 paranormal live streaming stations for paranormal.radio last year. So I'm keeping it there. In fact, we're going to expand as we go. Okay, continuing. New video just released of people trying to flee Burning Man caught in a river of trash. This is how Ebola spreads. Yeah, you see a bunch of mystery vans and a lot of trash. Looks pretty bad. Again, I don't see a lot of sympathy from the left or right. Here we have a gaffe where Joe Biden talks about how the Chief Federal Response Coordinator, Bob Fenton, how he was on the grounds in Hawaii before the fire started to help with the recovery. This is why they're going to have to phase him out. Because Joe Biden has the habit of saying the quiet parts out loud. But again, just a coincidence. Chief Federal Response Coordinator Bob Fenton was on the ground in Hawaii before the fires.
I was on the island last week. I appointed Bob Fenton, one of the nation's leading emergency managers.
My third eye says Ebola's a hoax. Yeah, I concur, and I would say even more, it's fakeable. Think about it. If you wanted to create some kind of a panic, and you have all these people concentrated, this would be the perfect opportunity. And here you would introduce disease X or whatever it happens to be. Just quarantine the burners. And you know that there's got to be enough people in there where they could fake it with a few actors here and there and scare everybody, lock them down, and everybody spreads the rumor. Like, it's the perfect ground zero for a new pandemic. We'll see what happens there, what kind of agendas they attach to it. 13 dead and thousands trapped in heavy rain and mud at the Burning Man Festival in Black Rock Desert, Nevada. Now, I can't verify the 13 dead. Food and water on short supply.
Community to come together, for the ethos to strengthen, for higher. For those of you who are unaware of the situation at Burning Man, unprecedented rains have flooded the playa, preventing exit by up to 3 days, putting food, water, and fuel in short supply. So to everyone at Burning Man, may this be...
Okay, we'll see. Turbo Nurbo says, I have heard rumors of flesh-eating shrimp coming out of the mud. Well, it says here, local authorities have declared the event a disaster. 73,000. Now, let's get at this thing here. This is important. This picture has been circulating for days. This is what appears to be Snoop Dogg in a pink tutu. And this is being shared by truthers all over the place. It's being shared hundreds of thousands of times. Holly here posted it and said, he's in the club. This is a humiliation ritual. Look at his hand placement, Monarch Butterfly MK Ultra programming. So we're looking at this picture of Snoop Dogg, and it's not a bad picture, it's just fake. I mean, it's a good rendering. I mean, it doesn't look 100% fake, but if you look a little closer, and I wasn't the one who figured this out. I just sensed it was fake. I posted it in our Gilded, which is a fake news wood chipper, and I said, people think this is real. And within seconds, Linda Curtis said, not very observant, LOL. And if you look, his hands look like they've been through a wood chipper. How many fingers are those? Look how that thumb is bent. Like, this is obviously not real. Just a clue. You know, if this is a hint. If you ever want to determine whether a photo that you see is real or fake, and it might be mid-journeyed, look at the hands. Wee says it's like Woodstock 1969 IPS. Interesting, 1969. And you know, there are many, 69, 70, 68 through 73. That time period has actually been more or less superimposed on the last 4 years, oftentimes with specificity. For example, the anniversary date of Apollo, we had a launch that day. Anniversary date of the Manson killings, we had a commensurate killing. It's also been the case that many of the phrases used by segregationists are being uttered by, you know, Trump or DeSantis. They are regurgitating the late 60s in every way. Correct, AI-generated hands. Hands are difficult. I mean, even, it's just learning at this point. One of my earliest memories of drawing was in preschool, where, you know, I hadn't learned how to count yet, and I just drew too many fingers on his hand until the kid next to me laughed, and I was mortified. But, you know, I realized then it's not easy. Got to give it time. Nazis in Florida, we've already talked about this. Turns out that one of them here, and they actually have his name, had served some time in Ukraine or something, but also somehow has been working with the CIA, by his own admission. You have feds and CIA plants dressed up as Nazis lurking in Florida. It's kind of a joke. Ricky Johnson says there's a tool to check images to see if they've been edited. Yeah, I've seen one where it puts it through a database or it searches and it tells you if it shows up anywhere else on the web or if it might be a new construct. And one of my issues here is that truther channels don't check to see these things. So how many people are now thinking that Snoop Dogg is in the club, whatever that means? And he may be, but it's just bad evidence. And I call people out for their bad evidence, like Brock Riddick, whose username is Brock Riddick IFB, which makes me think he's FBI. But he blocked me because I questioned him about this. I said, why are you and others purposefully spreading misinformation, or are you not aware it's bad? And they are very well aware that they are clickbaiting people. It's not just for the money, though. They are poisoning the well on purpose. That's the whole purpose of their mass spamming of Twitter with non-fact checked bits of seeming truth. And now, do you all remember the Goyim Defense League? Because we're talking about the CIA, the feds dressing up as Nazis and prancing around in front of the cameras just in time for the election. I mean, it's always coincidental. But if you remember, the Goyim Defense League, for a little while, were kind of one of our stalkers on BitChute. And I looked into them a little bit. Their leader, John Minadeo, who calls himself Handsome Truth, he's one of the ringleaders of one of these sort of Nazi groups. But many people suspected, and I have too, that he has been a plant by the ADL this entire time, that he was never a Nazi. But he's the one who got in the news because he went out to Auschwitz with a sign that called it a hoax, and he got arrested. So there's a few things about him just to know. But I also saw, a few months ago, he was attending city council meetings, dressing up as a stereotype of a groomer, you know, in a very Alex Stein-esque type of role-playing. He was attempting to go viral in the same way. So I noted that this individual from Goyim Defense League was some kind of an actor. Well, now it turns out that he used to be a rapper, that he was a failed rapper before he became this racist neo-Nazi. We'll go ahead and play a clip here. I think his name is Shubi Dawop, like D-A-W-O-P, Shubi Dawop.
I'm Mr. Minadio. That's my real name. My claim to fame is fuck your dame and sniff your pain. So on that note, you better guide your hoe, cause here I come, right down her throat.
Alright, there you have it. Appropriating the musical stylings and culture of a demographic he proclaims to hate. Here he is in his Nazi regalia.
Huh? Do you believe in free speech?
Of course I believe in free speech.
Do you think Europeans should be thrown in jail for questioning the Holocaust?
First of all, the Holocaust...
Anyway, Goyim Defense League, also known as Glowy or Glowing Defense League, just not believable. The fact that he's a rapper is not a surprise. And this is the video that I was referring to where he's a groomer. I've actually reported on this one, and this is when I realized this guy's got to be a sicko, where he was pretending to be a drag queen and then he was talking to young children on BitChute. And he crosses the line from parody of extremism to being that thing. So
yes, because white people are fucking awesome.
Take a needle and you take ink and you stab it into your...
I can't play it because he's talking to a child, but anyway, he's a psycho, and you'll find that this is the case with any of these costumed individuals that are basically rolled out in some kind of WWEF fashion. And it works, you know, the public buys this stuff. Alright, continuing. We have some more information regarding this supposed assassination and this hype about it. You'll find it's very prolific. It's not just me. There's an effigy of Donald Trump's head in the White House press conference room. But we have many different people now coming out and talking about this stuff. And Alex Jones can't get enough of it. Here's yet another example of Alex Jones, this time with Mike Flynn, last time is Roger Stone, but talking about how, yes, somebody's going to probably want to do away.
I think right now they're trying to kill Trump by narrative, right? I mean, the narrative is just constant narrative, and it's been going on for years. And, these latest indictments are just part of the narrative assassination. I would say, because of who he is and what he represents, which is a major component of the opposition to what it is that we are.
Now, this is a clip on InfoWars, but what I want to point out is during his discussion of how much danger Trump is in, they play the Zapruder film in the background. So there's this conflating of JFK and Trump, which is kind of interesting in itself, considering how often the JFK family has been associated, the dynasty has been associated with Q and the Trumpers, and how the Trumpers actually worship JFK. A lot of MAGA women are consumers of JFK Jr. fan fiction in the form of these just completely made up claims on Twitter. And it does seem to be a thing. Like there's some kind of fan fiction basis for all of this, but it has to do with worship of the Kennedys. But they've conflated Kennedy with Trump. In fact, if you remember last year, many QAnoners believed that Donald Trump was JFK in a costume. It's truly, I wish it was unbelievable. It is to me, but it's very believable to many of them. Speaking of believability, and I brought up Andrew Tate because I wanted to discuss the idea of constructs. Well, this is great. This is Eric Weinstein, and he is talking about Epstein being a construct of the intelligence agencies, that he had nothing to do with finance, that he was more or less an actor or a puppet.
Yep.
He makes a very compelling case. I'm going to go ahead and play that part of the interview.
And this fortune of Jeffrey Epstein that we can't explain, are those the same fortune? Now, it's like a conservation of money principle, that if you have a fortune that's missing and you have a fortune that can't be explained and they're connected by Ghislaine Maxwell, I don't know. Why is it that no hedge funds, what is it? They file form, I forget if it's 13F. There's certain forms that you have to file. Nobody's ever asked for these things. Who's his prime broker? Where has somebody gone over the prime broker?
Again, he's just talking about the lack of substantive evidence that Epstein did what he was claimed to have been doing, that this was all some kind of a lie, and that nobody had actually done any legitimate business with him.
What are his trades? He would have to move the market if he was, doing a yard of euros or Swiss francs or who knows what, as like $1 billion. That would move the market. So there's no way you can fake retroactively a hedge fund of immeasurable size that trades currencies. I don't think he was a currency trader.
Okay, now here's where he gets a little deeper. Not only does he not think he was a currency trader, but he goes into how it's very plausible that he was entirely a construct of an intelligence agency of some type.
He told me he was a currency trader.
So when you say a construct, who constructs? Who's the builder?
This is a great question. Who's the builder? And this is why I think it's important not to mystify predictive programming, not to assume that the predictive programming or any kind of foreshadowing in media means that what comes next is real, because it hides the writers. And that's what this interviewer is kind of getting to. Who is the writer?
I don't know. I would imagine some version of the intelligence community. Sometimes somebody's cover gets blown. We have a very famous, unfortunate story of Ellie Cohn with I'm
going to leave it at that, but the interview goes far more in depth, and it's very likely that you're looking at some kind of a made-up character, a front. Sort of like that Sam Bankman. You could find many examples where it would just be convenient to have somebody to fill that particular role. Okay, we have some information about NASA's need to deorbit the space station, but a couple of pull quotes from an article were posted in our server. This is interesting. It says, first it says Congress must act immediately, directing a fast-tracked phase-out of collaboration with Russia on the space station, while approving a plan to safely deorbit it by 2026. But here's the part that's interesting. NASA, as the world's dream factory that inspires and creates the best possible future for generations to come, now needs congressional help to break its dependency on Putin's Russia for space station operations. But this here, a dream factory. I've been suggesting for some time that NASA is not about taking you to some distant paradise or some space gulag, but that it is in fact controlling your inner space, mind control, specifically the imagination. And there you go. The leading dream factory. Okay, continuing here. Ricky John says Kennedys are just part of the club as the rest of them. Yeah, I've been looking into RFK Jr. lately. Interesting character. His dad died at 42 at the hands of Saran. And as he fell to his death, AP photographer just happened to take a picture of him. Richard Drew. So the 42-year-old was photographed on his way to the ground, dying. And the same photographer showed up at 9/11, and he's the one who photographed the falling man. Later, RFK Jr., at the age of 42, loses his voice. I think there's something to it. I don't understand the whole depth of it all, but there's definitely some interesting things to connect these Kennedy deaths. They all seem very dramatic and encoded in ritual. Like, there's no way JFK, his death, being fake as it is, would be followed by a real assassination. RFK's death was just as fake. JFK Jr.'s death, in all likelihood, is just as fake. Kubrick gives all the hints. In fact, if you look into the movie Eyes Wide Shut, which actually is quite boring if you think about it, if you watch it, I think it's a lot of hype, but it's mostly a coded telling of the faked death of of JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Tom Cruise in that movie is actually, in a subtextual way, representing JFK Jr. There's a reason for all of this stuff, and I believe it's also part of a contiguous story. You could actually follow Eyes Wide Shut with Open Your Eyes, or actually Vanilla Sky, the real title, but it was originally Open Your Eyes, Vanilla Sky, which contains many of the same elements, and it's a continuation of the story. There's this interesting connection between Kennedy, JFK Jr., and Stanley Kubrick. Like, the Kennedys feature in all of these various psyops and in the predictive programming in the strangest ways. Speaking of predictive programming, Kubrick, and psyops, you got to see this. There was a movie that came out a couple of years ago. I haven't seen it. It's called Moonwalkers. And the whole premise of it is convincing Stanley Kubrick to fake a moon landing.
7th Apollo mission to the moon in 10 days' time. We still don't have a clue whether the thing's gonna make it or not. So here's the plan. Meet with Kubrick. Convince him. You know, film a pretend moon landing.
Partisan Films, Moonwalkers. The premise of it is they could not guarantee they were going to make it to the moon, and instead of screwing up in front of everybody and losing the space race, they kidnapped Kubrick and made him do it. Now, this is not quite the soft disclosure it would seem, because it misses the essential point here, that Stanley Kubrick wasn't an outsider technical assistant called in to help them fake the moon landing. That, if anything, Kubrick's role is far more expansive, as NASA's role is more expansive. It's not about space, it's about inner space, it's about mind control. So this movie is misdirection. Kubrick wasn't one technical expert who did a gig and then confessed to it in The Shining, because The Shining contains even more hints of his involvement in something that hadn't come yet, which was 9/11. So yeah, The Shining does look back and throws hints that he did Apollo 11, but it foreshadowed September the 11th. So Moonwalkers is definitely what I would consider to be controlled opposition or a guardrail. Could not even be close to a true story. It wouldn't make a lick of sense. Again, Stanley Kubrick was not just a fantastic cinematographer, and that's why they recruited him. That is just a ridiculous misdirection line. His daughter goes on InfoWars quite often, and she says that if he had faked it, it would have looked a lot realer. No, again, misses the point. He also directed 9/11. Deal with that. Directed the JFK hoax assassination. But if you can attach it to Apollo 11, just say, yeah, Kubrick did this, it hides the fact that NASA does more than fake space. And moreover, all of the conspiracy theories that say that Kubrick only faked the moon landing still contend that space is real. They just had to do it to trick the Russians, which is absolutely insanely just ridiculous, because Russia and America and every other participant in the International Space Station, or in space fakery in general, are obviously in collusion. They cannot be enemies. There is no space race in that sense. We says, this is repetitive, but what is it in Eyes Wide Shut that proves RFK was not assassinated? Oh, the RFK, let's go and, if you want to look into the chart word, which is the breakdown of the fake death of Stanley Kubrick, he has this parallel storyline, and it probably starts with this. Eyes Wide Shut, released on July 16th, 1999, the day that JFK Jr. dies. And I have a few other interesting connections to this as well. Another one, strangely enough, comes from MTV. There was a video by Marilyn Manson that came out just before JFK Jr. died, and it was called Coma White. And this video featured Manson as JFK being assassinated. And what's weird about this one is that the structure of the video was based on a script that Manson had written, a film he had written, that was called Hollywood. And it was never produced, but it was based on the idea that there was a second coming. It was JFK, but they killed him. And so now the world is waiting for the third Jesus, who would obviously be who? JFK Jr. And so, funnily enough, this is the story of Q, who believed that Q was actually JFK, and Q plus is JFK. They have this whole ridiculous story that connects them. But the idea is they do believe that JFK was the second coming. They used to believe it. Why do you think they went to Dealey Plaza on 11/22/21? But now here's where it gets interesting. The video recreates the assassination of President John F. Kennedy with Manson as the president, Rose McGowan as the First Lady, and other members of the band as Secret Service agents with the convertible and Kennedy. But it goes on. They actually bring out a cross that's paraded through the streets, and on the cross you have JFK's picture. So you have this connection with JFK and Christ already correlated here. Now all of this makes sense when you look at the ritualistic symbolism of the assassination of JFK, Masonic and otherwise, which we can point to very specifically. Look up the 3 wounds of Hiram Abiff, and then look at the 3 places where Kennedy was shot. You'll see how precise the symbolism is. But now the video, this is where I'm finding this to be fascinating, because just like Eyes Wide Shut being released on the day JFK Jr. crashes, and it contains hints in the movie, just as it contained hints of Stanley Kubrick's faked death in the movie. We'll get to that in a moment. But this Coma White video, which has all these strange foreshadowings of this future belief system that would form the core of Q. The video was delayed. It says the MTV premiere was delayed because of the death of John F. Kennedy Jr. Manson issued a statement through his publicist, and they said it was intended to make people think, but he didn't know that it would accompany the tragedy of JFK Jr.'s death. He said it was not a mockery. But what do you mean it wasn't how would he even be culpable for a mockery? It hadn't happened yet. So it's just kind of one of these things where somebody has an inside scoop, an inside story, but this storyline of JFK being the second coming did not originate with the Q movement. It's older than that, apparently. It's just interesting that you can find it here in the video of a Manson song, which was actually delayed because of it. But now, if you want to go further into the, and you can read this yourself, I'll put links to Chartword's work here. But what he has done is he has connected The Shining and 9/11 in a way that really no one else has, and there are many other instances we could point to. If we want to do a full breakdown of Stanley Kubrick and his involvement in the PSYOP entertainment complex, I'll go ahead and pull this up though. We'll go through them again. I think we talked about this the other day. I was going through the Shining Part 2. There was a sequel to The Shining that was put out in 2013 by Stephen King, in which a baby predicts 9/11. A psychic baby predicts 9/11 in the sequel Shining. Do you see how unbelievable, how impossible that should be? Think about it. The first Shining, Shining itself has predictive programming for 9/11. And this is all Kubrick's work. This is not because of whatever Stephen King wrote. But then Stephen King's sequel makes predicting 9/11 an integral part of the storyline. Like, how do you explain that? But if you haven't seen The Shining, or if you haven't seen 237, I would look into that. But I can go further. I'm just saying, if we're going to look at this holistically, and you look at all the correlations with Kubrick's work, foreshadowing, and how every single one of his things, we go back to 11/22/63, Dr. Strangelove screening, same day JFK Jr. dies. Apollo 11, faked by Kubrick, launches from Kennedy spaceport on 7/16/69. The Kennedy is always written into every one of these. You can even look at Full Metal Jacket, and Joker is based on Kennedy. It is why he has the target on the side of his head, why they make Lee Harvey Oswald jokes. I would even go so far as to say the 45 on the side of Trump's head is a Kubrick touch. But when we go through, and I don't have all my research in front of me at the moment with Chartword's work, but I will go through it all. And if you want to sit here and watch one of these days with me, Eyes Wide Shut followed by Vanilla Sky, I could point out scene by scene by scene where there is a story being told here. And I know it probably gets redundant for a lot of people who are already familiar with this. And I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it, but I would say it's 100% that JFK Jr.'s death and the timing of it is most likely a hoax, especially when, again, we have the storyline of the dead Kennedy thing as being a reoccurring theme going back to 1999. Now, RFK's death being faked, my assertion that it's faked is simply that it contains all the same hallmarks of fakery as all of the rest. I would probably recommend Miles Mathis's piece on it as probably one of the best breakdowns of it. But it follows a long pattern, and he's actually done this whole article on what he called the Hidden Kings, and the idea that the Kennedys were secretly ruling from the shadows this entire time. And this is the type of stuff, the real deep esoteric rabbit hole stuff that has filtered its way into the core of the QAnon belief system. So Q is literally believed to be John F. Kennedy, 108 years old. The idea that the Kennedys were a liability to the elite and needed to be dispatched is mythology. I think they were obviously as corrupt as anybody, and anybody who thinks that Kennedy was Jesus has no idea of the type of abuser he was of young women. Did any of you watch that movie Blonde, where he basically rapes Marilyn Monroe? It's pretty sick. But you can find many stories of JFK's, not just their infidelities, but his just twisted abuse of his of people he had access to, or passing them around to his friends at swimming pools, like stuff that you wouldn't think of somebody who has some kind of a moral high ground who's a threat to the elite. No, I think that they're all in the same club. Now, Eyes Wide Shut is definitely horrible. Vanilla Sky is a Gnostic Christ allegory. That's why David Ames dies at 33. Every single scene in that movie is calculated to tell a number of stories. It's layered. If you remember the opening scene in Vanilla Sky, it actually starts out with this locked down New York. And he and his girlfriend are faking a cold. Kind of a COVID predictive programming there. It's a movie worth examining in and of itself, but there's a subtext to it where it kind of tells the story of a continuing story. But the Gnostic part of it is the most interesting because it really establishes the role of Tom Cruise as this Scientology Jesus, or the Gnostic Christ character, which is definitely what he represents in the movie, and that's also why he is awakened from his death. He's resurrected by a woman named Sophia. Sophia is the personification of wisdom in that particular belief system. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some Miles Mathis here, and we'll get into the fakery of RFK's death. Look, there's a strong desire for a lot of people to want there to be good guys that they can worship, or heroes that they can depend on, that Trump is like a rogue and he's a good guy. And you can, I understand the need for it, I suppose. But Trump is 100% plugged into this fake news matrix. So this is the article. The Hidden Kings, Camelot ruled from the cave of Merlin. The Kennedy faked death fake hoax by Miles Mathis. And he's been covering this for a long time, these various hoaxed assassinations and deaths. But what he suggests here is that the whole mythos around the family is just a construct. I'll put a link to the article below. It's 88 pages of content here. He is really deep in the detail. He goes into such exquisite detail here. I think he leaves little room for any belief that this was anything other than a staged theatrical production. Like, here we go. Are we to believe that Oswald was arrested in the theater with a bag full of different colored sweaters, and he was allowed to keep them in his cell? Are we to assume that the officers who starved and punched him into the shape we see him in the famous footage became concerned that he might be chilly and offered him garments? We must assume it was not Oswald's free choice to be taken from his traveling wardrobe. Prisoners are not given choices like that. Like I said, he goes into the weeds here. He hyper-analyzes all of these pictures, but he's suggesting that they put Oswald in a black sweater to hide the lack of blood, which is a pretty astute observation, a very likely possibility. There's more. He also points out that in all likelihood, this scene where Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby had a pre-planted microphone. So was this a spontaneous event, or was it meant to be, staged for the public? And there's quite a lot of interesting conjecture in here regarding his role with Riley Coffee and what happened with the other employees at Riley Coffee after the so-called assassination. And one more thing, just like a lot of people wrongly say they remember when we landed on the moon, a lot of people think they remember the Kennedy assassination. Like, no, they didn't. Like, maybe they remember hearing about it, but it wasn't live on TV. It wasn't like that at all. Kennedy was not shot at this time, and if he was shot, it wasn't by Zapruder, it wasn't shot by Oswald, it was shot by Stanley Kubrick. We may go into a number of these hoaxes here in detail in the past, but I'm just pointing out Miles Mathis has done a deep dive into all of these characters, and he's concluded that they are not who they claim to be. He even goes so far as to suggest that JFK wasn't even a woman, and that his supposed exploits were all just a cover for that, which is plausible. Okay, let's see here. Wee says, I could see men in exalted positions could become drunk with power and think they could defy the elite. In what way? I mean, if somebody gets involved in politics, they automatically seem to just go along with the big psychological operations. Anybody who still believes in nukes is upholding the power structure. Anybody who still believes in outer space and space wars and space junk and climate change, there's no way they can shake up the system. They're holding it intact. I just see controlled opposition. And the MAGA movement has just been a big honeypot this entire time. It was never meant to succeed. It was never meant to do anything other than, I think further the divide between the traditional and the progressive. And they've really made that distinction, between the traditional and progressive very stark in the last few years. And I can see them even pushing it further. Which is all very intriguing to me, considering that Trump is not a traditionalist. Trump is a liberal. Trump is basically a liberal Democrat, or has been, I think. I mean, when has he ever espoused any true conservatism? He mouths the platitudes. He knows the dog whistles. He knows the things they want to hear. But if you look at his own life, I don't think he's the most conservative person. But people will see what they want to see. I mean, people literally think that he's Jesus. Okay, continuing. So much fakery, so little time. But I guess it's worth pointing out that they've always faked things. And for some reason, there's this tendency to think that all of the news I haven't watched is real, or everything that happened before I was born was real. That's why it's essential to go back and establish that, no, this has been the modus operandi for the MSM forever. In Behold a Pale Horse, Bill Cooper recalls watching the JFK assassination on TV, which I think is suspicious. Yep, exactly. What is that? See, to me, this is how the Mandela effect works, where people don't really remember it, but they're recalling an imagining of it. Like, in other words, it's a conflating an imagining with an actual memory, and just kind of lazily assuming it to be true, not even vetting it in a serious way. But it is important to point out that it wasn't like that, because people assume if everybody saw it, it was real. If it had just been viewed by so many people and there was any way to have faked it, it would have been exposed if there was any kind of chicanery. But no, there weren't that many witnesses. Nobody saw the Zapruder film on air until like 12 years later on Geraldo Rivera. It took a while. Now, just because I don't believe the Kennedys died the way they say, doesn't mean that I think that they are coming back with Q to save anybody. There's a pretty interesting article in Salon right now about the Sound of Freedom movie, and I believe I was right when I said it was just a cynical marketing ploy, and it was meant to recruit QAnon types. But we definitely called that one right. It's an article in Salon. It says QAnon 2.0, Sound of Freedom, and the Rise of MAGA Vigilantism. Right-wing influencers pushed a paranoid, anti-immigrant hit movie while pretending they never heard of QAnon. This was what I found so reprehensible, is that the people producing this movie pretended like it wasn't a Q recruitment, and then many of the people sharing it said this has nothing to do with Q. Tucker Carlson had this confused face and he said, why would anybody associate it with Q? It has nothing to do with Q. Anybody who said that thinks you're dumb. This was 100% a recruitment film for Q. It was barely even disguised. You have Jim Caviezel, who says that the elite are drinking adrenochrome and they're going to stay young forever. It's like, right, look at Hillary Clinton. But he says this, and Tim Ballard believes in Wayfair. But this is not disconnected from Q. And the fact that they try to market it as somehow separate just shows you that they are totally dishonest. It says, right-wing commentators went out of their way to tie the child abuse message of Sound of Freedom to anti-immigrant paranoia to pursue QAnon's pernicious goals without explicitly endorsing its movement. They didn't have to say it out loud. And it was basically said on the side. And this movie was meant to come out at the height of QAnon's popularity, which I think it's waning. I do think it's a heavily shilled movement, but we shall see. I mean, it's an election year. Operation Mind F, QAnon, and the Cult of Donald Trump, where I suggest the wake of Trump's 2020 defeat and January 6th led the QAnon followers to pretend to leave the movement and rebrand themselves so they could pursue it under more innocuous banners. They have this thing called Agenda 47 that Trump put out, where he talks about killing human traffickers. That's obviously an empty campaign promise, but it's definitely something the Q a crowd want to hear. They can't wait for executions. Have you heard Stu Peters lately calling for the lynching of Hunter Biden and Dr. Fauci? Like, that's where Stu Peters' head is at right now. My third eye says that Timothy 6:11 thing is a big clue. Yes. If you haven't seen Sound of Freedom, Timothy 6:11, a Bible verse, is used throughout the movie, and I think it's a reference to Timothy McVeigh. We talked about this the other night, how the death of McVeigh symbolically is a key moment in the whole white nationalist versus the government story here, which is all mostly built on psyops. But McVeigh was, of course, motivated by Dave Koresh and Waco, which is where Trump kicked off his campaign this year. No coincidences. Mike Sington, who is here on Twitter, said, in response to Donald Trump, because Trump said, "Were you better off today or 4 years ago?" Mike Sington on Twitter said, "Today. For one thing, I don't wake up every morning worrying that a late-night tweet is going to result in a nuclear war." I don't know if you remember that, but whenever Trump would tweet, people would think it was going to end the world. But this is a senior executive at NBC Universal. And I'm just pointing out that people were scared. People are scared. So we talk about nukes being fake all the time, but most people are actually scared of them. Brainwashed and scared. Unbelievable. All right, we covered the fake Nazis already, and Joe Biggs's fake prison sentence for 17 years. I think he came out and he said he believes that Trump is going to pardon him when he gets into office. Also, we covered yesterday, Woo's News has been revealing that a couple weeks ago we have someone who was at the January 6th event revealing that Ashley Babbitt's not dead. It was theatrical blood. Yeah, if you haven't watched the movie Sound of Freedom, at the very beginning, you see him with this little child who hands him this, I think it's called a scapula, some kind of like Catholic necklace thing, and it has a Bible verse, Timothy 6:11. Well, Timothy 6:11, Timothy McVeigh's assassination or execution date 6:11. It's an inverted 9/11. Inverted as in domestic terrorist versus the foreign terrorist. 6/11, 11/6. These numbers have been correlated throughout predictive programming going back decades, when you really look back, leading to 1/6. Even going back to Waco, and I talked about this last night, Waco, 1.6 million rounds, weapons violation. January 6, 1.6. Alex Jones, radicalized at Waco. Again, Timothy McVeigh, radicalized at Waco. Later executed at 33. Dave Koresh was 33. They believed he was Jesus when they torched him. Jones, radicalized by Waco, helps rebuild the whole Branch Davidian thing. Goes on to Piers Morgan and says that if the government tries to take our guns, 1776 will commence again. Well, 1776 was one of their catchphrases for January 6th. He even had Joe Biggs on the show last night say, "Give us a 1776," like a war cry. Well, when Jones was on that show with Piers Morgan, it was in reference to the fact that the DHS purchased 1.6 billion hollow point rounds. Then you have Dominion sues Fox for $1.6 billion over the claims that their voting machines were compromised, over that defamation. So 1/6, again, is a number that's been positively connected with this entire right-wing domestic extremist attack to come, January 6th, and also the nuke thing, the 11/6 or the 6/11, which also figured into the Batman movie when they blow up the dam, flood the poles on 11/6, which again, 6/11, 11/6, interchangeable. Then you have Oppenheimer, which I just watched, and Oppenheimer's wearing a badge that says K6. K is 11, 11/6. He has the 33 pounds of marbles in his bomb model that he's building as a build the real thing. And In that movie, it's an IMAX. They shot on an IMAX film. The director, Christopher Nolan, said it's 11 miles long, 600 pounds, 11.6. And then you have Putin threatening to use Satan too. And in this scenario, this Turner Diaries helter-skelter white nationalist attack on the world scenario, they work with the Russians. So here you have Putin with his Satan 2 missile, and it goes 16,000 miles per hour. Again, the 1.6. This code goes back so far that you have to rule out coincidence at this point. I could point to other examples. Season 1, Episode 6 of Inside Job. Well, already in there you have connections between 9/11, Alex Jones, and January 6th, just in the title and the season and the episode number. And in that episode, the Kraken comes out of the water and it pulls down Jeff Bezos's mega yacht. That represents the Titanic. The Titanic represents America. America, the Titanic, the Twin Towers have all been correlated, and the Kraken is this reoccurring theme we've seen that started in July of 2020, and it's always referenced November the 3rd, the election date. So it all goes back to that. But this Kraken thing, in fact, even just the other day, Russia put out this article about this new super weapon, some 33-foot squid being weaponized in some way. I mean, the symbolism is just off the charts, but my point of it is, it's all leading to the same apparent outcome. Okay, let's continue here. I mentioned how 11/3 is a very significant date, November the 3rd. Well, that's the next date, the next episode or next installment of the Godzilla franchise comes out. It's the 33rd by that director. And if you remember Godzilla versus King Kong, they store Godzilla in sub-level 33. But this new Godzilla movie is the 69th birthday of Godzilla. And 69, as we were studying earlier at the beginning of the summer, it's the symbol of Cancer, the crab. And then at the summer solstice, when we enter the sign of the crab, we have the Titan submersible going down to the Titanic. This is all a very well integrated and connected story, but it does connect to, again, this something from the sea, the destroyer from the sea. In Oppenheimer, he refers to the bomb as the destroyer. If you look at Revelation 9/11, it talks about the destroyer in the abyss. This is how you correlate these things. When James Cameron was at the Titanic on 9/11, he was in a craft called the Deep Sea Challenger. He was filming a movie called Ghosts in the Abyss. So you have the Challenger in the abyss, the Challenger, Abaddon, the destroyer. It's all the same thing. The destroyer in the abyss. So here you have a correlation now between the destroyer in the abyss, Oppenheimer, 11/6, and Putin. And of course, Godzilla, interestingly enough, was a byproduct of the nuclear bomb tests. That's what created him. So he's a creation of the nuclear age. Okay, let's continue. We have some more conjecture here regarding, here we go, CBK News, and this is Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. It appears the Burning Man Festival is going to be a mass sacrifice to Satan. All those young kids fell into the trap. Looks like Ebola maybe, with gain of function. FEMA appears to be locking it down and fencing them in. They're going into high gear. Sad. Annie Worthington responds, "You all need to stop listening to Alex Jones and Joe Rogan. That's where the conspiracy theories are coming from. You cannot move forward if you listen to their lies. I feel sorry for those people, to be honest. I wouldn't want to live with the fear and hate with that kind of life." Now, Annie has a point here. There's a lot of superstition and hate and fear that go into a lot of these conspiracies. And a lot of the stuff is stuff that doesn't exist. Like, you're going to hate or fear things that, like space aliens that want to do things to you in coffins full of feces or whatever Jones was ranting about. Yeah, that stuff's not real. But it keeps him up at 3 in the morning. Keeps General Flynn up at 3 in the morning. Okay, moving on. Going through my Twitter feed, we've just been looking at these various instances of people overreacting or underreacting, minimizing it and mocking it. And I wouldn't mock it necessarily, but like I said, I don't mind watching the factions eat their own. And you see the left attacking their own for using their RVs to drive out into the desert. They see this as Gaia punishing them. Okay, let's see here. Nick Fuentes is sort of a... Look, I used to bring up Nick Fuentes because he says these shocking and outrageous things. But at this point, it's pretty clear that he's a parody of extremism. Shock value for its own sake. And I probably won't cover him much longer. What I have figured out here is that you have social media influencers who are there to spread ideas, nothing more. They're simply propagators. And it's so uniform that you can kind of sense that they all have the same string pullers. But Fuentes is pretty desperate. I'm sensing Alex Stein levels of desperation. He's just lauding China. He's always praising various forms of authoritarian controls and restrictions on freedom, etc. Anyway, Jake and Jelly, QAnon Shaman, said, "What is it going to take for people in the conservative camp to denounce this man-child?" He goes on to say, "Are conservatives so afraid of a bunch of pedo-Nazi groypers that they won't call them out?" Let's debate Nick. So the guy with the animal skins and the bull horns and the face paint, who went to jail for running into a Capitol with a spear, is trying to talk sense into conservatives, trying to ask them to stop listening to the ultra far-right Poe. Now here's Joe Biggs on InfoWars, who believes that Donald Trump is going to set him free. And I think he's in jail. He's supposedly in jail. I think Joe Biggs is in a back room at InfoWars, and they have some kind of a recording that makes it sound like it's a jail phone. Because Jones asks him at the end for a 1776. Again, there's that code again.
I said, they're not going to hold me down. I'm going to keep my head held high. I'm a warrior. I don't give up. This fight's not over. It's only just begun. And I'm telling you right now.
Thank you for using Global Telling.
See, that's a recording.
Biggs.com. And
thank you for using Global Telly. So he's in jail. But Jones says, "Give me a 1776, brother."
Donate to support your appeal. They want to grind us down. They want to break our will. Give me a 1776, brother.
1776, brother.
Yeah, 1776 is the year the Illuminati were founded, the year America was founded. 1776 AL is the year, Masonic Year of Light, that the Tower of Babel's construction began. 1776 AD would be 5776 AL, or Anno Lucius, which happens to be the height in inches of the Great Pyramid. And you look at the back of the dollar bill, Great Pyramid, 1776 on the bottom. What it's telling you is that America is Babylon and the Tower of Babel. It's all the symbolism. I brought up the Twin Towers and how, as they were falling, Cameron was at the Titanic. They're correlating these symbols. That's why Cameron directed the Titanic 4 years before 9/11. And the Titanic split in two and went vertical like a tower and had jumpers and everything. He encoded the 9/11 drama into the Titanic movie in advance. And they do this because subconsciously you're making these associations. America, the Titanic, not too big to fail. It's hitting its iceberg. They reiterate this programming even more recently with the movie Don't Look Up, where they put Leonardo DiCaprio as the anxiety-ridden, agoraphobic scientist, warning us about the comet that's going to hit the Earth. So now the Earth is the Titanic. And the space iceberg, the comet, is coming. And Earth is being steered by the rich, the capitalists, the trillionaires, or the wannabe trillionaires who want to go mine space, and they want to mine this comet, and it gets us all killed. So the sinking of the West, because it's led by greed or the rich or property owning capitalism, it's pretty much the same story being told again and again. It's the same story we get with environmentalism. But my point is, Cameron was there in the abyss when 9/11 happened because they're telling this story, and the story is still evolving. It's also very notable that 11/3, Godzilla's birthday, is the day of the new tower because the tower, rises up again. It opened 13 years later. Okay, let's see here. We have so many examples of Flynn warning us about black swan events. I'm not going to replay too many of his quotes here, but just it's enough to know that he's putting it out there, and he is a major player in the Psy War, in this what I consider to be an alternate reality game. It's definitely a game, and the only winning move is not to play. I'm going to go ahead and open phones. Numbers on the screen: 505 349 0420. We have a number of things to cover today. The fake Snoop picture, which has been debunked. That is a big problem. Not for me specifically, but it's a huge problem that not only are they flooding the zone with misinformation in the terms of narratives and storylines that are fake, but now they're putting out such convincing visual imagery that people are being lied to in a whole new way. It's just another way of lying. If I post a tweet and I say something that's false, you would call it a lie. Well, if I post a picture that was generated by Midjourney and it promotes a falsehood, is it a lie? Am I a liar? Well, some would say you have some sort of plausible deniability, and I just don't think so. And I'm constantly calling out these big channels on Twitter that have the word truther in their title, who spend their entire time just spreading all kinds of very obviously fake images, and it muddies the waters, but I think it's by design. Again, I think this is all definitely connected to the Aquarian age, the information age, an info dump, that the truth has lost any sort of tangible hold on objective reality, and this is all clearly a byproduct of generations of mind war under the guise of mass media. Okay, we also talked about the Glowing Defense League and how these neo-Nazi racists are actually failed rappers. Like, what do you get out of that? Failed rappers. Let me play a little clip again. This is Goyim Defense League. And these individuals stalked me once, so I know who they are. I did a deep dive into them. And to see that this is their origin does not surprise me at all.
I'm cooler than an icicle, ride 'em like a bicycle, threesomes on tricycle. The sex is phenomenal, for boobies are bionical, and some find it comical.
There you have it. That's the leader of that group that put Ye was right over the freeway in Los Angeles. Then they moved to Florida. They get a lot of attention. But interestingly enough, they only get attention because the ADL gives them coverage. If the ADL didn't give them coverage, nobody would know they exist. Which leads many, myself included, to believe that the Goyim Defense League is actually part of the ADL. And I stand by this because the more I look into the so-called white nationalists, it's all Kabbalah. It's all like numbers and codes, like 1, 2, what does that mean? 1, 2, AB, Aryan Brotherhood. Wait, I have to decode stuff? So you have like what, white nationalist Kabbalah? It's just so unnatural to me. It just seems like unorganic is what I should say. Fake. Controlled opposition. But they failed at rap, so they somehow got recruited into this. I don't know how it works, but apparently somebody flew him out to Auschwitz, and he got himself arrested, and he's been an agitator ever since. I believe he moved from California because somebody found his address. All right. Let us continue, just going through the notes of the day and the meltdown of Alex Jones and General Flynn. Again, these individuals are trying to convey to their listeners that we need to be afraid because something's going to happen to Donald Trump very soon. And this was the same thing they hyped up in 2015, 2016. Back when Jones used to say that Donald Trump was George Washington reincarnated. This is kind of an interesting point, too. And I'm going to bring this up tomorrow with the documentary. That with the advent of Trump, and he got his foothold into this with the whole birther thing, the GOP managed to turn conspiracy theorists into a voting bloc. And they've kind of merged the two, and they politicized them. And I thought this was problematic when I saw it occurring, because we had, at that point, already started to understand the nature of psychological warfare and psyops. And these psyops are not being done without the knowledge of people at the level of, Trump. You think that he's being tricked? Do you think that that any of these presidents are being tricked or fooled by psychological operations that involve police, that involve first responders and governors? No, these are capstone events, as Wolfgang Halbig describes them. Okay, continuing. I'm looking for updates regarding Burning Man. Again, the whole Burning Man thing turned out to be a mud flood and possible Ebola outbreak, although I don't find anything else here to substantiate it. But note how fast people are to jump on rumors that the worst possible things happened. Wee says, guessing the burners are just loving a few more days of techno drug party. That's what I thought it was. I mean, I've never wanted to go to the Burning Man. To me, it looks like the left-wing version of Bohemian Grove. But they do the same things. It's all based on some kind of ritual burning of an object. It's just pagan. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's definitely some sort of a ritual. It has an esoteric meaning to it that is, by design, going over the heads of the majority of the ticket holders. All right, this is the leader of the Nazis crying in his car.
Fun, flirty text.
Because I guess he went through his girlfriend's phone and she was sending flirty texts to his other Nazi buddies. And he's pretty open about his feelings, which is kind of surprising. So if you were at all intimidated by these Nazis in Florida, especially the ringleader with the big swastika, he's kind of soft. Take a listen.
From fun, flirty text to nasty in a couple days. So I know what's happening, and I'm not dumb, and it's not even look.
Look, I'm not mocking him, but he's got the name Wotan tattooed on the side of his face. And here he is in his car, weeping like a TikToker, like a TikTok crisis actor, someone just getting some attention in some way. It's just unbecoming.
I got my wife. She can fuck and be with any dude she wants.
Anyway, no big deal. You just got failed rappers and over emotional stormtroopers. It's a LARP world order. And I think we should also reiterate that all of the attendees at the Burning Man, they're all hypocrites. Not just because they're contradicting their own beliefs on environmentalism and why we shouldn't travel and we shouldn't have carbon footprints that extend more than 6,000 steps a day. Isn't that what it is? I know they rate limit tweets. You can read 6,000 tweets a day, but they're going to adopt some kind of rate limits. And these are the people who would adopt these things. And here they are out in Burning Man having fun. But what's more, these are all 100% COVIDiots. They bought it all. So the fact that they're out there in the desert not observing social distancing or any of that stuff just shows you the type of either hypocrites or just how detached from reality people are, to where it's just every day it's a blank slate, like Groundhog Day. Bears no relation to what happened last month. It's cumulative. Reality, everything that happens, it matters. The past matters, and somehow people forget these things. It matters that every previous, and you go back in time, every previous mass event, mass shooting is questionable or likely having already been debunked as fake. It matters that we're on an edifice of lies. It's not like the news media could just change one day and suddenly not be a vehicle for the government exercising authority and control over people's minds using covert means. It's always going to be that. The next moon landing's fake. The next lander going to the moon is fake. It's a house of cards. We just texted a friend at Burning Man. Let's see what he says. Yeah, I tend to think that the person who was there is a little more credible than the TikToker. Now, if you're looking at the screen, again, this is the effigy of Donald Trump's head. Very ominous. It's a figurine with a beat-up head, and this is in the White House briefing room. It's in the White House briefing room, so it's a little conspicuous. And I would classify this as predictive programming, and I'll throw it in with all of the rest. If anyone wants to be interviewed tomorrow, all you have to do is be available. We'll be live at probably 12 p.m. to like 1 or 2, and then they will show up. And I'll have a Zoom conference or a Skype conference open up there in our conference room. And anyone who wants to jump in, I'll leave it open. And then we'll, there's a couple of people who are already planning to do so, but I'll leave it open to others as well. We'll give them as many viewpoints as we can. And if you have any updates from your friend at Burning Man, let me know. A lot of people were praising the police who knocked that barrier away where the environmentalists were trying to block people from going in. And again, I'm seeing it now. A lot of people on the left are saying this mud flood was caused by Gaia. So you should have listened to those martyrs. You should have listened to your activists. Again, here's a picture of the Phoenix thing that they burned at the Burning Man. It starts off as an obelisk, and this is at Black Rock City. Symbolism is hard to miss there. Now, they say the Phoenix was some kind of monument to Ukraine. That's just a cover. Obviously, it's just a cover. The Phoenix itself has a deeper meaning. Again, the impromptu poll, 75% of the people I polled know that nukes are fake. 25% admit to being scared and brainwashed. And it's not a small thing. It's a very important white pill. The fact that these things are fakeable and likely fake is a paradigm shift if you really follow it through. And I think this was reiterated in the movie Oppenheimer, the compartmentalization of knowledge is to such an extent that, yes, you can keep secrets that big. There are no secrets too big to keep. There's this ongoing, very bad argument against the moon landing hoax theories that it's too many people, the secret's too big to keep. And that assessment that there's some secrets that are so big, so many people would have to be involved that you wouldn't be able to keep it. No, that falls apart when you take into account the fact of compartmentalization. The fact that you have the ability to compartmentalize and stratify info makes it very easy, in fact. Our society is, for all intents and purposes, if you ask me, it's practically two-tiered. Actually, it's not even like 50-50. It's such a small minority in the know versus the masses that are lost in subjective beliefs in this dream world. Gematria 101 says there was a sentient AI, what is that, sentient AI bot? An AI robot at Burning Man in 2018. I think I remember seeing that one. Yeah, here we go. 2018's theme was iRobot. This year's theme will focus on the many forms of artificial intelligence that permeate our lives, from the humble algorithm and its subroutines that sift us, sort us, and surveil us. Are we entering the golden age that frees us all from mindless labor? 2018 art theme. Kind of funny that says this. Are we entering a golden age that frees us from mindless labor? And now you have Hollywood on strike because they're afraid that AI is going to take their jobs. I have a few more video clips here. Again, we're just trying to find out how much of this disaster is actually just mud and how much of it is some sort of intentional FEMA-based operation where they're going to introduce the new strain, disease X, to this controlled population and then let it outbreak from there. A lot of apocalyptic speculation. My Third Eye says, even if an insider tries to tell the truth, they can easily be drowned out in the sea of irrelevant information. Oh yeah, look, you could look on Twitter right now, and you could probably find all the secrets of the universe. All the secrets are out there, but there's just no way to correlate it. You would need a hashtag, you'd need to connect some dots, but that's what's happening. Is it's almost like we're being shouted down every single second. I'm always telling Musk, how many times, how many hundreds of times have we tweeted Elon Musk, indirectly or directly, with hashtags or ats, saying, oh look, you fake this, you fake that, this is fake, NASA, you're fake. It's going on all the time. People are pointing out anomalies that ought to be called out as questionable and or fake. At a minimum, acknowledged as fakeable. But does it change anything? No. No, not really. I almost feel like the other side can be somewhat arrogant at times in their confidence. They just seem like they're super confident that they win long term. And I think it's because they know. They know that they can burn your books and drown you out. But in the end, their approved content is all that remains. If it is not in Big Brother's viewfinder, it doesn't make it into the big picture. Your Mama says, I think Burning Man is a mind control ritual and the Department of Defense is involved. Yeah, I agree. It is definitely mind control. And there's a few pretty good threads I have posted in Gilded on some of the secrets, the occult side to it. There is a secret society involved in the core of the thing. Really no different than Bohemian Grove. Like, I think these are analogous things. I think right-wingers go to the Grove. Left-wingers go to the desert. But it's the same thing. The Burning Man, the cremation of care, the Phoenix, the Christ. These are all analogous symbols. Now, the way I correlate the Christ with the Burning Man and the Phoenix, this will probably put it in a clear perspective. It's called Catharsis at the Mall. And you think we'd hear more about this. Catharsis on the Mall. And if you look at their symbol, it's the obelisk and some flames. It's the Burning Man of DC. They burn a man, and nearby is a 45-foot statue of a nude woman looking on. You may have seen the imagery from it, but they burn an effigy at the base of the Washington Monument. Now, the symbol of the Washington Monument is simply an obelisk, and the dead sun god, that's his grave, and that would be Isis. Now, the symbolism here, of course, is that he's dead because the darkness killed him, the Prince of Darkness. At the setting of the sun, the Terminator line, this ties into the meaning of the Terminator going back in time to kill the Savior JC, or Jesus Christ John Connor. But here you have the obelisk as the symbol of his resurrection, of his impending rebirth the following day. So they burn him in effigy here because he's like a phoenix. He burns and he will be born again. There's your phoenix reference. And then second, the obelisk symbol itself, the symbol of this sun god, has to do with the rising of consciousness along the Kundalini, the 33 vertebrae, the ascension, the transcendence, you could say, transcending the material world. That's why they say it's Mach 33 to escape Earth's gravitational pull, escape velocity 33 times the speed of sound. 33 vertebrae, transcending the material, the sublimation of flesh into spirit. You could look at it as ice, melting point, 33 degrees becomes liquid, state change. This is why on the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11, they projected the Saturn V rocket onto the obelisk. And they projected the whole mission of it launching. Because the burning obelisk, the burning man, the burning rocket, the rocket going into space, it all represents this dying and resurrecting sun god motif. It's the same set of symbols. So you can correlate the phoenix with the number 33, with Christ and the burning man. And this is also notable here because we're talking about a burning human being, an effigy, but it's all symbolic. I talked about the 33-year-old burning man with the USA shirt at the Washington Mall in 2019. 2020, they cancel the Burning Man. However, on the day of the Burning Man festival, which was in August of 2020, Ye did this thing called Dawn Day, where he had a house that he stepped out of while he was on fire. It was like a replica of his childhood home. But Ye did a Burning Man performance himself. He was the Burning Man. And here you see him on fire in a group of people. Watch video for Ye's, I think it's called Come to Life. Interesting name there too. Come to Life. Kanye West burns away. Now again, this happened on the day that you would have had the Burning Man festival, but it was canceled. But yet, still you had this ritual going on. The timing of it, though, is what really stood out to me. And again, just to quickly reiterate, there were 33 consecutive Burning Man festivals until it ended. Bookended with actual 33-year-olds torching themselves in D.C. in the view of the Washington Monument, which again, at the Washington Monument, they literally do a Burning Man effigy. It's redundant. If it sounds redundant, it's because it is. It's because it's repetitive, because these are rituals, and they do them every single year. Again, this is from popularresistance.com. Catharsis at the mall. So you have a circle of people around the phallus of the dead sun god, and they're incinerating a dummy. Normal way to spend a evening. On the evening of Saturday, November the 21st, 2015, the event culminated in a burning ceremony at the Temple of Essence to transform our individual stories into collective memory. People were invited to bring small mementos, photos and letters, all to be burned together. Now we have a similar ceremony here, it's going to be in Santa Fe, it's every September. They call it Old Man Gloom, where you write down your complaints from the previous year, or things you want to get rid of, and you drop them in these boxes. And these boxes are gathered, and all these requests are dumped at the base of this somewhat animated figure. This kind of like, it's like a puppeteer thing, but it's a giant figure of a man that they set on fire. So they do the same thing here. It's a very similar ceremony. Usually it's in May, but this one was in November. A vigil for the healing of the drug war. So we're looking here at the Temple of Essence, which I'm not going to say what I think it looks like, but everything about this is occult and ritualistic. And what I wanted to point out too was on the anniversary of Apollo 11, when they projected Saturn V onto it, it's to reiterate it's the same symbol, but the New Age obelisk flies into space. It literally flies into the heavens. Skill says, Burning Man is a satanic ritual. ISIS, Labor Day, Burning Man, water in the desert, 40 days until the Ring of Fire. Interesting. Fascinating connections there. Now, I think there's even more. Now that I think about it, in 2019, that Labor Day weekend had some chaos. There was a boat that took off from Santa Cruz, and it had 33 people on board, and they all died. They all burned to death. And this was, again, the weekend of that 33-year-old who had been found dead at Black Rock City. Here we go. ATF. The boat was called Conception. Now, you know, we're talking about the meaning of the obelisk, and it's about the conception of the sun god. That's why it's a fertility rite. Well, here we got a boat, and this is in September of 2019, called Conception. The burned boat It's a diving boat. Sank on September the 2nd in the waters off Santa Cruz Island. 33 diving enthusiasts died while trapped by flames in the bunk area below deck. I remember examining this and examining the Burning Man death and examining the guy who set himself on fire in front of the White House. And I thought, what is going on here? Conception. The name Conception really stood out to me. It also stood out to me as fake at the time. And I think there was another story the same day, which I may not be able to find here on the fly, but it was a school bus with 33 children that got into an accident. I don't think there were deaths, but it was at the same time. And I was just like, at the time we were just following the news headlines. I'm like, there's something going on this Labor Day weekend. A lot of chaos. Iron FE says, top capstone of the Washington Monument is from the highest point of the peaks of Otter Mountain, Virginia. The areas of the Beale Chipper Treasure. Never heard of that, but that is very interesting. I'll have to look into it. I heard that the obelisk was 555 feet high with 111 feet down below, which would make it a 666, which wouldn't shock me. The capstone is a symbol in and of itself. It represents the pharaohic elite, the bloodline, the ruling class. And what's more, on the rocket, the capsule, note the terminology, the capsule, the capstone, it's the same symbol. Bezos' capsule has a feather on it, and it says blue origin. It makes me think blue blood, like the gold tip of the obelisk representing the pharaoh. The capstone, the capsule represent, again, those who are at the part of this structure that actually is above the rest of the pyramid. You'll notice if you look at the back of your dollar bill, the capstone actually hovers above. And that's the two-tiered thing I'm talking about, the ones in the know versus the deceived below. The Beale Cipher Treasure, okay, I'll look it up, but what you can undeniably point out here is that the obelisk is definitely a far more ancient symbol. And they are openly practicing these rites. It struck me when I saw that one catharsis at the mall that it wasn't more well publicized like Burning Man or this other one, Bohemian Grove. Really quick, this is the one I was referencing, the Stephen King Doctor Sleep. Doctor Sleep is the sequel to The Shining. It's a 2019 supernatural horror film. But now here's where it gets interesting. And her name is Abracadabra. Abra Stone, a baby girl born in 2001, manifests psychic powers on her own, and she seemingly predicts the 9/11 attacks. So here you have a very blatant connection between The Shining and the prediction of 9/11, which fits in neatly with the predictive programming in The Shining, quite literally predicting 9/11, just as Space Odyssey 2001 does as well. Trump's staged death. Staging of Shakespeare's Julius features Trump getting assassinated. We talked about this, but it was in the news more recently because I guess they lost their funding. But interestingly enough, it takes place in Central Park. And we were talking about the word park stands out very prominently in many of the psyops and mass shootings, specifically in the last couple of years. There seems to be the use of this word having some kind of significance. For example, when the Parkland High shooter was on trial or getting his sentence, you had the Highland Park shooting, which I referenced, where the shooter wears or has a tattoo of the number 47 on the side of his head. He's obsessed with Lee Harvey Oswald, and he goes to Trump rallies. So you can put two and two together. He shoots up a 4th of July, 4/7 or 7/4. He shoots up a 4th of July parade. And this again was Highland Park, Parkland High. JFK was taken to Parkland Hospital. So I'm just pointing it out here that the killing of Trump was happening in Central Park. Now, what does the word park have to do with any of this? Some pointed out maybe it has to do with Westworld Park. Maybe it has to do with the West. There's some kind of significance, though, but that's been attached to that word in this context. All right, moving on. On 10/4, there's going to be an emergency alert that will sound alarms on all U.S. cell phones, TVs, and radios. Still a month away, but just pointing it out that that date is being looked forward to by many QAnoners who have been eagerly anticipating a period of darkness that will precipitate or precede the arrival of the Kennedys. Yep, dead Kennedys are off to our rescue. Okay, here's another Kubrick connection worth looking at. The Kubrick stare. One of Stanley Kubrick's most recognizable directorial techniques, where a character stares at the camera with a forward tilt to convey how deranged they are. So here you have a number of Kubrick characters, and you can look how Trump has that same Kubrick stare. What does that mean? Well, I mentioned the 45, 47 on the side of Trump's head, that hat. 9/11. 45 is 9, 47 is 11. There's a 9/11 encoded into this Trump head wound storyline that's been developing. And in the movie Full Metal Jacket, of course, the character Joker, who represents JFK, has the target on the side of his head. And that shooter from Highland Park, the sniper, as he was described, you can look at a picture of his mother carrying a target bag. Not too subtle. But the target on the side of the head is just fascinating. And look, it's undeniable at this point. We are not cherry picking. It is being force memed out there into the public awareness. Joined here by Diana South from DLive. Thank you for joining. Skill says Mercury is in retrograde until September 15th, then it will go direct. So there's that. And what does that mean? What does that mean, that Mercury is in retrograde? Does Mercury matter? Absolutely. Mercury was rising 8:46 a.m. on September the 11th, 2001. There's a film called Mercury Rising, actually, about a autistic child who was able to decode signs or symbols in the news, and he predicts some sort of terror attack. This is actually something worth looking at. Let me bring this one up. The movie Mercury Rising. This is beyond coincidence. Again, Mercury was rising at 8:46 a.m. when 9/11 started. This movie, Mercury Rising, 1998 action thriller with Bruce Willis and Alec Baldwin. Originally called Simple Simon. It's about a 9-year-old autistic boy, Simon Lynch, who's targeted by government assassins because he can crack top secret government codes. So he's an autistic savant, Simon Lynch. And the interesting thing about it is it has to do with predicting these various operations. But here's where it gets more interesting, because Mercury Rising is the 9/11 connection. But this actor, the kid who predicts it, or who has these predictive capabilities, his name is Miko Hughes. His dad died in the Twin Towers on 9/11. So he's in a movie 3 years before 9/11 where he's this autistic kid who's able to predict events. The title itself is predictive of 9/11. And then his dad dies in the Twin Towers. If you want to believe that. Although you cannot find any evidence of it. Like so many of these, you look at the database and you're like, well, where can I find it? But you may recognize him as the child from the Stephen King Pet Sematary. He was Gage. All right, let's continue. Just kind of going over the Burning Man situation, which isn't over yet. It's going to take a few days. I don't think it's as bad as many of the TikTokers report. We're also awaiting I guess the next big thing, the next shoe to drop here is whatever is going on with Trump, which is being overly hyped. And I want to point out something because this is key. There are many channels out there I would recommend, like Donnie Darkin, for example, who hone in on much of this predictive programming about this ascension of Trump in this new form, this antichrist narrative that's attached to him. But one of the things I want to point out is that just because you can find foreshadowing doesn't mean it's going to be real. Many of them are saying that this is going to happen and it's going to be the next 9/11. Yeah, sure, but it's still fake. And the point of it here is that if you treat it as real and if you are not preemptively waiting for facts to prove it one way or the other, if they get you with the emotional hook, you kind of step into their game. You step into the world stage, controlled dynamics. And I prefer to keep my off-world stage perspective. I prefer to be will be the oasis of sanity as things plunge into chaos. Should this happen, and can you recall a single time where copious predictive programming did not turn out? I mean, we're still kind of looking, back hindsight on a lot of these things. And using it as a predictive model is not at all guesswork. It's actually just recognizing for how it actually works. Skill says Ebola outbreak at Black Rock City. Still, I think it's a rumor. We're still waiting for some verification. I haven't seen anybody displaying it, but I've only heard or read secondhand accounts. Mostly just hearsay. Here's a clip. If you didn't hear of this before, this is General Flynn's cult. This is the I Am Temple prayer. Elizabeth Clare Prophet. This is the group that channels the Ascended Masters. And when you look at Q and their obsession with dead celebrities that have left the world stage but are still active in this fight against evil, this is where it comes from.
Mighty I am present. I am here, O God, and I am the instrument of those sevenfold rays and archangels.
We are your instrument of those sevenfold rays and all your archangels.
We are your instrument of the sevenfold rays and all of your archangels. That's verbatim. And you have a room full of people chanting this. And if you don't know the origin of Elizabeth Clare Prophet and her cult, it was founded by a guy who believed he was George Washington reincarnated. And they channeled Ascended Masters, and they're fighting a deep state with their white hats. Same story. General Flynn, who is preaching and teaching this stuff under kind of the guise of patriotism and Christian nationalism, has been known to dress as George Washington at Q events. It's all very intriguing. And I'm just pointing it out here that Q is definitely a cult, but it's a government manufactured, created cult. And this cult ended up with people in bunkers waiting for China and Russia to nuke them.
And we shall not be enslaved by any foe, within or without. So help me God. God bless you. God bless America.
There you have it. Anyway, nothing to see here. We've been covering it for some time. Most of you already know this, but I think it's intriguing to look at all the different threads that come together to create this tapestry that we call Q. It even includes the ideas of Seventh-day Adventism. When you had all those individuals waiting for JFK to show up on that hill, yeah, that's straight out of Seventh-day Adventism. And the great disappointment when he didn't show up, when Jesus did not show up, they called it the Great Disappointment, but it didn't end their movement. It actually solidified it. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is that even though JFK Jr. never showed up, nonetheless, the cult is even more, galvanized around this belief. It's kind of like it's not as bad as some of the other, like Scientology, for example, but I'd say it's analogous. They do become something of a separatist group as they become increasingly detached from mainstream society. Diana South says they are enslaved, yet declare a decree that they are not. Yes. Well, it is definitely a cult in the worst sense. It's a doomsday cult. As bad as environmentalism. Probably worse. Yeah, we covered the Burning Man. Benton, basically, most of it is paranoid conjecture. I could find a juxtaposition of someone here talking about how people are dying and puking out coagulated blood. And that would be this one here. And then I'll follow it up with somebody who's actually there. So according to the TikTok verse, we are looking at some kind of outbreak of some kind.
Most of y'all have probably heard that Burning Man was declared a national emergency, but there's some pretty crazy stuff coming out.
Yes, Turbo Nervo says, just got a text from my friend, no FEMA camps, no Ebola, and no murder shrimp, just mud. Yeah, that's more like what...
So we're okay. I think that the news is saying that it's pretty bad out here. It is. There's mud. You can't really walk or drive. We have Wi-Fi for a moment, so I'm posting this. This is how Pega and I look right now. Yep, no shoes because it's really hard to walk with.
Okay, they're basically it's like being at a beach. I don't see what the problem is. Diana South comments, the Seventh-day Adventists believe eating meat makes people lustful. The food pyramid was created by a Seventh-day Adventist, Kellogg, of cornflakes. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. Okay. Interesting. Well, the idea that JFK was going to come back at Dealey Plaza, as laughable as it is or was, it was taken very seriously by a lot of people. And you have to wonder, where does this stuff come from? Well, these come from intelligence agencies, operatives, people like General Flynn, who know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how to play with groupthink. And I witness it all the time. It's like the emperor's new clothes. You can see the dynamics there of people conforming to fit in, even if they have to sort of lie to themselves and pretend to believe to fit in, because fitting in is more the point than the truth itself. I've been watching this thing unfold, and it's getting more intense now that Flynn is openly saying that their leader is going to be killed, and that the only way to save the world is through Trump. And the martyrdom of Trump. I mean, Trump has been turned into a martyr in so many different ways. A lot of it is not even conscious. If you think about it, here they are having him arraigned on 4/4 on the anniversary of MLK's assassination, and shortly after, he's conflated with Moses the same way that MLK was. And now you have this image of Trump, this mugshot, the mugshot seen around the world, where it's turning him into, or it's created the icon. You know, you need this for martyrs. You need to have some kind of image that people can rally around. This is not a spontaneous thing. They might have taken 10, 15 shots to get it right. But this image is, of course, proliferating like crazy around the internet. And it's mostly grassroots or fake grassroots, astroturfed. I'm seeing a lot of ridiculous hype that this is somehow giving him street cred. Now he's got credibility with the street. Yeah, give me a break. All right, tomorrow we're going to be live from about 12 noon to, well, maybe 1 or 2. So it's going to be a little earlier. I will be sending out text notifications because we want to get some phone calls in. And if you want to participate or be interviewed for this documentary, it'll be really easy to get involved. I'll let you know tomorrow. But we will be live streaming with them in the office here to get some B-roll. And what I'm doing here in the office tonight is I'm ensuring that the story of the Infinite Plane Society is, told in what they see here. So I have the publications, the tabloid, the Autohoaxology 101 is a key component, and other things. But we're going to be working with them from about noon to like maybe 3 or 4. I'm not sure how many hours it's going to take, but for the most part, I'll be keeping you appraised of it as we go along. Diana South says, Trump has been playing the victim since he was in office. Who gets a copy of their mugshot? Nobody, that's who. Well, many on the right are calling it his greatest moment. They're looking at this as a propaganda victory. It's all about form. It's all about the visuals. It really is so shallow when it comes down to it. But you're right, though. He's always been playing the underdog. It's a strategy. It's very much Saul Alinsky type stuff. It's all about framing the debate, the conversation. But like, yeah, now he's finally going to do it. He's finally going to go after the deep state. He's finally going to drain the swamp. Can't wait. But the genius of it was the framing of it as the deep state. And, you know, the domestic equivalent of ISIS exists. That's what Q actually is. QAnon, Quran radicals. Quran radicals want to go after the great Satan. QAnon radicals want to go after the deep state. There's really no difference here. They have perfectly merged these things together. They've created the domestic equivalent. But now Trump comes out here with his glowering face. It's just what the movement needed. I think it is sort of catalyzing them, like now it's finally going to happen. It's amazing how you can always just dangle that carrot or pass out a few breadcrumbs. It's that hopium, you can be clean for months or years, and then one convincing bit of hopium, one meme, just drags people back into the cult. Then you see these influencers like Roseanne Barr is out there right now heavily promoting the QAnon narrative and cult. I think it's mostly failed. They bring out Jim Caviezel, Tim Ballard, and it turns out that the reason why those movies were trending so high, if you remember, Sound of Freedom trended higher than even Indiana Jones. But the reason why is likely because they were gaming the system by buying a bunch of tickets for other people, probably filling up theaters, fake, astroturfed. No different than when people like Donald Trump Jr., he released a book called Triggered or something. And I'm pretty sure that there are rooms full of hard copies of his book at Mar-a-Lago and at various storage facilities. There are various ways that they can artificially game the system to make songs #1 on iTunes, to get their books on the New York Times bestsellers list. And then when they get pulled off those lists, they can claim that they're being censored. It's all a grift. It's pretty incredible. Playing the underdog, yeah, that's another strategic grift. Very Alinskyite. Very much one of the tactics of Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. All right, this has been great. We're going to be back earlier tomorrow. I'm going to be here in the office working on things. In fact, I'll probably follow this up. We'll be in the Discord server. So subscribe to the newsletter. I'll put a link below. And tomorrow will be big. But then after that, we have an interview with Woo's News coming up, and that should be huge. We have an eyewitness to the fakery of the Ashley Babbitt death who can attest to it being theatrical blood, among other things.